Hi, I'm Chris McMahon. I'm a financial expert. For the last 4 decades, I've helped people navigate their financial lives. We've helped thousands of people and manage over $600 million of assets. And today we're here to help you live the best financial life you can. We're going to talk in detail about building the ultimate financial plan, the 6 steps you must take in order to build the plan that suits you best. We'll review those in detail. And by the end, I promise you'll have a better handle on what you're doing, why you're doing it, and where you're heading. We're going to talk about defining your values and setting your goals, assessing your current financial situation critical, identifying all the challenges and hurdles you're going to come up with, developing a comprehensive strategy or a roadmap, critical step, implementing your plan, and then lastly, reviewing and monitoring that plan regularly. Those are the 6 steps that we're going to go through to building this ultimate financial plan. I assure you by the end of this thing, you're going to say, I have a plan, I'm ready to move forward, and I'm going to live my best financial life. Let's talk first about defining your goals and setting a little stage as to what is important to us. This is a critical step in financial planning. We see so many people avoid this step. They'll simply take a pre-canned financial plan and say, based on my age and based on my income, I need to have X or Y in terms of at the end. We found when these plans aren't personalized, aren't really tied to the most important values and goals a person has, they really never land. Someone might adhere to it for the first 3 to 6 months, but over a long period of time, they'll get a disparity where they're simply not going to really stick with the plan. So it's got to be on personally. And how do we do that? We have to get out that blank sheet of paper and say, what are the 5 most important goals for me? And if I'm married, what are those 5 most important goals for my spouse? That's going to be around everything: family security, philanthropy, which is very important. Who are we giving money to? What are our core values? We want to identify those 3 top core values and say, these are the core values that this plan is going to reflect. You'll hear the term a lot. We'll use it all the time. We want it to be smart. We want it to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. If it hits those 5 things, we could say, here are our goals very clearly, and here's our values, which is really very important. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is a little bit painful. And we see a lot of people avoiding this one as well, is assessing our current financial situation. Almost half the people you ask and you'll say, do you have a financial plan? They'll normally say no. And you'll say, why? They'll say, because I know I'm not in a good space and I don't want to really face that burden. I don't want to face that pain. This is an important part of the process, and it's critically important that we take out that kind of blank sheet of paper again and say, where am I together? Where am I today? Where are my assets today? Where are my retirement plans? Where are all my debts? So oftentimes we go through this process and we put together a balance sheet. It allows us to say, not as bad as I thought. Maybe sometimes it is as bad as we thought, but that's really the longest journey starts with this first step, saying, here's where I am, here's where I'm going to start to work from. And it's to get a full understanding of income, expenses, assets, debts, and certainly insurance and coverage as well. That's very, very important. Along with that, we'll get a copy of those estate documents. If we've done the wills, we want to get a copy of those. We want to look at those as well. The next step, of course, is to identify the challenges we face. And certainly there's always opportunities as well. But those challenges are really to analyze our current situation, to spot any challenges. What are the big challenges? High income debt. That's a huge challenge to people. We've seen people in the past have large amounts of student loans. Sometimes they've refinanced it, and you only really have one shot at refinancing it. If we refinance at a higher interest rate, that's problematic. Or if we have high rate credit cards that we are now struggling to pay off. The good news is, as we roll forward over the next year or 2, we have an expectation we're going to see lower interest rates again. And then, of course, things like living expenses, or maybe we have a spouse or it's ourselves who has a spending pattern which is inconsistent with saving. That's a big problem. If we come from we're really bound to the culture we grew up in so many ways. If we grew up in a spending culture and a non-planning culture, and our spouse has grown up in a non-spending culture and a planning culture, we've got to bring those things together. And it's very important that we kind of have those conversations out loud and say, what are our hurdles? We have to say, perhaps the wife would say to the husband, one of our hurdles is that you spend far too much money on recreation or whatever the case may be, or you spend far too little time planning and you're not funding your retirement plans as much as you should. Because that's probably the place where we start. Retirement planning is critically important, and those retirement plans, employer-sponsored plans, are super, super important. So identifying the challenges is really important. Normally it's going to be, people say initially, I don't have enough money. I'm not earning enough money is the challenge, but that's never really the challenge. We take a step back and say, wait a second, let's look at those expenses. Let's look at the monthly net income. Let's look at those expenses. And every budget I've ever seen over these last 40 years, we could take 8 to 9% out of the budget and expenses and not even cut into any bone and still give people the comfort to know that they're then able to save, which is very, very important. And the next step 4 says, we talked about, is to develop a plan. That's creating a comprehensive strategy. It's a roadmap, if you will, and things will change. We want to update it as we go. But it's very important to have a strategy around saving, investing, and managing debt. And those oftentimes are integrated. We see people get to step 4 and say, I'm concerned that I have huge amounts of debt. I have no room to save. But upon reflection, oftentimes we're able to take that debt and put it in a more efficient debt mechanism. A home equity loan, as I mentioned a few moments ago, interest rates are going down. If interest rates go down, that means that we're going to be able to refinance in a home equity loan, freeing up sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. And certainly that might be the place that we could find those few dollars to start saving in a 529 college fund, or put a little bit more money into the 401k or the 401k Roth. Particularly as people get closer to retirement, we want them to think first about their retirement, secondly about their children's education, thirdly about any kind of philanthropy would be after those as well. And then of course, step 5 is implementing that plan, which is a big step, because sometimes people enjoy the process, they embrace the process, they really get detailed about, first of all, defining those SMART goals that we talked about a few minutes ago, talking about assessing our current situation, identifying all the challenges we're facing, and then developing a plan. But implementation is the hard one. We see over and over again over the years, people will say, I have this plan, here it is, it's beautiful, perhaps it's in a bound book and I have it there. Great, it says that you're going to start saving 5% in your 401k in the second year, or take those pay increases and put them in the 401k. How's that gone so far? And they say, well, I haven't started yet. And we'll say that was 6 years ago that you developed the plan. So it's very important to take that first small step. That's why it's critical that it's broken up into a 180-day plan with action items each 30 days. And the first action item probably likely be take that first step, establish an education fund if there's children, and certainly make sure we are participating in the retirement plans at work, at least to the degree there's an employer match at the initial. And of course, lastly, monitor and adjust the plan. That's a mistake people make all too often. They finally set up a plan, they assess their risk level, they start investing and saving in an appropriate amount. Well, here it is 10 years later and they've never adjusted the plan again. What's happened? They've gotten older and closer to retirement, so they have this different appetite for risk, generally a much lower appetite for risk. And as they get into this situation, they say, my goodness, I have risk tolerance, which is much more aggressive than I'd like it to be. A good rule of thumb for anybody who's retiring or thinking of retiring at some point is about your age, about what should be in fixed income. Of course, there's always variables that factor into that. But a 30-year-old person might have a portfolio allocated 70% to stocks and 30% to bonds. This is kind of classic financial planning. And as you get older, when you're a 50-year-old person, should be 50-50, and 60-year-old person should be 60% bonds and 40% equities. However, we need sometimes more time than we have if we're that close to retirement. So the closer we get to retirement, traditionally the more conservative our investments become. So that rule of thumb would really help us to say about our age is what we should have in assets. That's why monitoring step 6 is just so important, to making sure that we monitor and adjust the program regularly, because if we're not doing that, the reality is we're going to have a plan that's completely inconsistent with our goals. So those are the 6 steps, right? We want to define and set our goals initially, and use SMART. Remember, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We want to assess our current situation and be fair about it and take the rose-colored glasses off. We want to identify specifically the top two challenges that are make this impossible for us. We want to take those head on. We want to develop a plan, and we can use a financial expert if we want, but we don't have to. There's lots and lots of online resources we could use. We want to take that first step. We want to have a 30, 60, 90, 180-day plan. That way we can take each step along the way. It's very important. And of course, we want to at least check in every 6 months, make sure our plan's okay. If we're working with an advisor, we want to meet with that advisor on a 6-month basis, particularly as we get closer to those goals of education and retirement. And then of course, we want to meet with every kind of key stakeholder. If it's a husband and wife, if it's a family, a larger family, we want to make sure we meet with those people at least every 6 months and make sure the plan's on track. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to make sure our plan aligns with our deepest held values, which is critically important. We want to see what is important to us, because if we're investing in things that are inconsistent with what we believe in, the plan will fall apart. If we're espousing values which we don't support, the plan will fail. That's why it's important to do these 6 steps. And I think that will get you the ultimate financial plan. And I think ultimately it'll put you on the path to financial security. I'm Chris McMahon from Aquinas Wealth. Please make sure you like and subscribe for more content like this.